First of all, definition and overview Islamic and conventional documentary credit. As we know, documentary credit is a protecting payment in international trade. As generally, documentary credit are often used when the parties to an international trade do not know each other and the exporter does not want to send goods to the importer without being sure that payment will be made. In addition, parties involved in international trade are importer. Who is importer? Importer is a buyer who gives the instruction for opening the documentary credit. Second is the importer's bank. Third, exporter, which is seller. And the last one is exporter's bank. Definition in conventional documentary credit. Documentary credit are a payment method that ensure that the exporter receives payment immediately after the goods have been sent. Documentary credit can also used as a financing method, and the term of the individual documentary credit may stipulate that the importer be granted a credit. Documentary credit are a kind of guarantee. The bank issuing the documentary credit guarantees that the exporter will receive payment once a term of the documentary credit have been met. Meanwhile, in Islamic view, documentary credit are not treated as a guaranteed payment, but rather as a fee-based banking service to facilitate trade. Islamic bank usually issue documentary credit on the basis of wakalah, murabaha or musyarakah. The important thing is all operations must fulfill the requirement of Sharia ruling. The processing of documentary credit usually involves two banks, the documentary credit opening bank and the correspondent bank to whom the documentary credit is sent for advising the exporter. Form of documentary credit. So have a three form of documentary credit. First one is revocable, irrevocable, and the last one is conformant credit. So we go to the next slide to know one by one. The first form is revocable. This form may be amended at any time by the importer without the approval of the exporter. The importer bank can cancel its commitment before the goods are shipped. It is used in situation the production of goods that he will not be able to send because his customer or bank has withdrawn. So it is explained why the form of documentary credit almost never used in practice, which is revocable form, because it will give negative impact for exporter because the importer can cancel it any time. The second form is irrevocable. The importing bank makes a strong commitment to pay. This type of documentary credit cannot be changed or cancelled without the consent of all parties. The exporter considers the irrevocable documentary credit as a confirmation of the order. So, he can start producing the goods because it is a guarantee to be paid by the importer banker if he fulfills all his commitment. And the last one is conformant credit. This type of documentary credit contains a guarantee to make a payment to the seller if the documentary credit conditions are met. Confirmation is only added irrevocable documentary credit. The bank that provides the second guarantee is called the confirming bank. If he wants confirmation, the applicant or importer must state this explicitly in his documentary credit application. The certifying bank bears the credit risk of the issuing bank as well as the political and transfer risk of the importing country. The certifying bank is usually the correspondent of the importing bank located in the exporting country. Without documentary credit verification, the documentary bank simply forwards to the beneficiary without taking its own commitment. In documentary credit have four forms of payment. The first one is side payment, second one is deferred payment, acceptance, and the last one is negotiation. So we move to the next slide to know one by one. First payment is side payment. A cursory payment with a nominated bank means that when the named bank determines that the presentation made to it is compliant, to repay, the named bank must forward the document to the issuing bank or the verification bank. If the nominated bank is also a certifying bank, it must pay the beneficiary upfront for a compliant presentation. Unless the nominated bank is a confirming bank, it has no obligation to pay the beneficiary at a glance for a compliant presentation and may forward the document to the issuing bank for payment. The second payment is deferred payment. If credit is available with the nominated bank through deferred payment, the nominated bank may honor by incurring a deferred payment undertaking for a compliant presentation. By incurring a deferred payment undertaking, the named bank promised to pay the beneficiary on the maturity date. The deferred payment undertaking for the nominated bank must be clearly notified. If the beneficiary requires, the named bank may make a prepayment of its preferred payment undertaking. To repay, the named bank must forward the document to the issuing bank or the verification bank. If the named bank is also a certifying bank, a deferred payment undertaking is incurred when a compliant presentation is made and the certifying bank must pay at maturity date. Third is acceptance. If credit is available with the nominated bank through acceptance, the nominated bank may accept by accepting a draft issue to it for compliance presentation. By accepting the draft, the named bank promised to pay the beneficiary on the maturity date. Before accepting a draft, the named bank should be careful to check the presentation to determine that it complies with the credit, as the receipt of the draft represents an unconditional and irrevocable promise by the recipient to pay. To repay, the named bank must forward the document to the issuing bank or the verification bank. If the nominated bank is also a certifying bank, the compliant presentation made to it obligates the bank to respect and it must pay at maturity dates. Negotiation. If credit is available with the nominated bank through negotiation, the named bank may negotiate a compliant presentation. Draft must be made at a bank other than the nominated bank, and this distinguishes negotiation from acceptance. Purchase is by way of the nominated bank advancing fund to the beneficiary before the date that reimbursement is due from the issuing bank. If the nominated bank is also a confirming bank, it must negotiate without resort a compliant presentation.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Nur Nabila binti Hashim 273241. I will explain about application, opening and advising, and amendment in Islamic and conventional documentary credit. Let us go to Islamic documentary credit first. In Islam, there are 5 main documentary credit, which are Al-Wakalah, Al-Murabahah, Al-Musyarakah, Al-Daman, and Al-Mudarabah. First is the application of wakalah in documentary credit. Firstly, as soon as the importer signs documentary credit requirements and requests the bank to provide the facility, the issuing bank may require the importer to place a deposit to the full amount. The issuing bank may require the importer to place a deposit to the full amount of the price of the good to be imported, which the bank accepts under the principle of wadi'ah yad damana. Then, the issuing bank will establish the documentary credit and pays the proceeds to the negotiating bank, utilizing the importer's deposit, and subsequently release the documents to the importer. The negotiating bank claims the reimbursement from the issuing bank as per the reimbursement instruction. Finally, the issuing bank will change the customer fees and commission for its services under the principle of al-ujur based on the wakalah principle. The next concept is al-murabahah. After the importer and exporter sign a contract, the importer will inform the issuing bank of his documentary credit requirement and request the bank to purchase or import the goods, indicating that he would be willing to purchase the goods from bank upon negotiating of the documentary credit on the principle of murabahah concept. The issuing bank will appoint the importer as its agent to purchase the required goods in his behalf. Next, the bank will establish the documentary credit and pays the proceeds to the negotiating bank, utilizing its own fund. Then the issuing bank will sell the goods to the importer as a sale price comprising its cost and profit margin under the principle of murabahah for settlement on deferred term. Finally, the importer will take the possession of the goods and disposes of them in the manner agreed. Next is musyarakah documentary credit. After the importer and exporter sign the contract, the importer will inform the issuing bank of his documentary credit requirement and negotiate musyarakah financing for his requirements. The importer places his money to the issuing bank as a deposit of his share of the cost of goods to be purchased or imported as per the musyarakah agreement, which the issuing bank accepts under the principle of wada'ah yad damanah. The issuing bank establishes the documentary credit and pays the proceeds to the negotiating bank, utilizing the customer's deposit as well as its own shares of financing. The issuing bank releases the documents to the importer, then he will take possession of the goods and disposes of them in the manner agreed. The issuing bank and the importer share the profit from the venture as provided for in the agreement. Next is documentary credit in al-daman. In al-daman, the applicant requests his bank to provide a letter of guarantee under the al-daman concept. Then the bank proceeds to establish a letter of guarantee, thus permitting the applicant to conclude his business with the seller. The letter of guarantee has the form of a documentary credit and subject to the terms of the documentary credit. The bank pays the seller, thus discharging the responsibility. The bank may request the applicant to place a deposit for facility under the agreement between them. The bank charges the applicant a fee for the services. Charges for the services of providing a guarantee is allowed in Islam, and documentary credit issued on the strength of a bank guarantee is permitted in Islam. The last one is al-mudarabah. In the documentary credit issued under the mudarabah scheme, the bank invests its own funds to issue the letter of credit and participates in the profit that the investment generates. The distribution of the profit is in accordance with an agreement entered into between the bank and the applicant before the documentary credit is established. By applying to this concept, we can offer a solution to what lies at the core of the problem in the current practice of documentary credit. We can rid the system of riba or interest levied on funds provided by the banks. This is being replaced with a profit-sharing arrangements. Next is the opening and advising in Islamic documentary credit. The opening bank or the issuing bank will represent its customer or the exporter who will create the documentary credit on behalf of its customer and will send it to the advising bank. It is specifically for an import Islamic documentary credit or guarantee. Meanwhile, the advising bank provides advice to the beneficiary and takes the responsibility for sending the documents to the issuing bank and is normally located in the country of the beneficiary. It is specifically for an export Islamic documentary credit. Next is the amendment of the Islamic documentary credit. An amendment to an Islamic documentary credit signifies any change made to the terms of an Islamic documentary credit after it has been authorized. An amendment can be made at any time after an Islamic documentary credit has been authorized and before its expiry date. The details when amending the Islamic documentary credit are such. First, the issuing bank have received an application from its customers to change the terms of the Islamic documentary credit. Secondly, the advising bank have received instructions from the issuing bank to amend an Islamic documentary credit advised to the bank. We can amend the details of the contract depending on whether Islamic documentary credit has been authorized or Islamic documentary credit has not been authorized even once after it was input. Depending on the authorization status of an Islamic documentary credit contract, you can amend its details as follows. First, when you have captured the details of a contract and it is not yet authorized, its attributes, financial as well as non-financial, can be changed even if the details have been saved. If accounting entries are involved in the change, the old entries are deleted and new ones passed. For each amendment, a new version of the Islamic documentary credit will be generated. Different versions of the Islamic documentary credit will also be generated by events like reinstatement and reopening. When a customer requests for changes in the terms of the contracts, the details of the Islamic documentary credit are amended accordingly and an amendment instrument is generated. The amendment of the following details of an Islamic documentary credit result in the generation of an amendment instrument like an amendment in the Islamic documentary credit amount, an amendment in the expiry date, or any change in the latest shipment date or any change to the free format instructions for the Islamic documentary credit. If there are changes in the terms of the Islamic documentary credit other than in the amount, the expiry date or latest shipment date indicate the same in the form of a free format instruction for the amendment instrument. While amending the details of an Islamic documentary credit, you can specify the commissions and charges that you want to levy for processing an amendment. This will be effective from the date of amendment and will not affect the booking commission. Next, I will explain about the application, opening and advising, and the amendment of conventional documentary credit. Firstly, the buyer or the applicant will sign a contract with the seller or beneficiary. Secondly, the buyer will inform the issuing bank and will apply the letter of credit or documentary credit. Then, the issuing bank will issue the letter of credit to the negotiating bank, and negotiating bank will confirm the issued documentary credit to the seller. After it is confirmed, the seller will ship the good to the buyer. At the same time, the seller will send the export document to the negotiating bank. The negotiating bank will then forward the document to the issuing bank and also to the buyer. Then, the issuing bank will transfer the fund to the negotiating bank. The buyer will make a payment to the issuing bank. And lastly, the seller will make the payment to the negotiating bank. Next is the opening and advising. The opening bank or the issuing bank is the one which creates a letter of credit and takes the responsibility to make the payments on receipt of the documents from the beneficiary or through their banker. The payments has to be made to the beneficiary within 7 working days from the date of receipt of documents at their end, provided the documents are in accordance with the terms and conditions of the letter of credit. If the documents are discrepant one, the rejection thereof to be communicated within 7 working days from the date of receipt of documents at their end. Meanwhile, an advising bank provides advice to the beneficiary and takes the responsibility for sending the documents to the issuing bank and is normally located in the country of the beneficiary. The last part is the amendment of the conventional documentary credit. The documentary credit cannot be amended or cancelled without the agreement of the issuing bank, the confirming bank, and the beneficiary. It is given that it is beneficial for all involved parties to know which amendments has been accepted and which has been rejected. For that reason, the beneficiary should give notifications of acceptance or rejection of an amendment. It is, however, often the case that the beneficiary does not give such notification. This may place the involved banks in different dilemmas, like the actual terms and conditions of the documentary credit and also the documentary credit balance and timelines. The beneficiary can accept an amendment by communicating its acceptance of the amendment to the bank that advised the amendment, or making a presentation that complies with the documentary credit and with the not yet accepted amendment. At the same time, the beneficiary can also reject an amendment by communicating its rejection of the amendment to the bank that advised the amendment, or partially accepting an amendment. That's all for me. Thank you.
Next, I will continue with presentation and negotiation for Islamic documentary credit. Thus, the letter of credit, also referred as documentary credit. Documentary letter of credit or commercial letter of credit is an arrangement whereby the applicant, which is the importer, requests in the form of instruction the issue bank, which is the importer's bank, pay the exporter on its own behalf. Effectively, it is an undertaking issued by a bank for the account of the applicant or for its own account to pay the beneficiary the value of the draft and or against document provided that the terms and conditions of the letter of credit are complete with. Through the letter of credit, the seller is assured he will receive payment for the goods he has exported to his client, and for payment to be made by the bank, the seller is required to present the bank the necessary shipping documents confirming the delivery of goods purchased within the given time frame. The commercial letter of credit deals only with a document, and if the documents are compliant, the seller will be paid. Thus, the letter of credit is a document issued by a bank or any other financial institution which permits entitles the beneficiary of the credit to obtain payment through his bank, subject to compliance with the terms and conditions stipulated in the letter of credit. In international trade, it functions as a banking mechanism which allows importers to offer secure terms to exporters. Next is negotiation. As far as the Islamic letter of credit is concerned, the above requirement and parties are acceptable if they comply with the requirement of Islamic law. There are several banks involved in the LC process. These are the issuing bank, advising bank, the correspondent bank, the nominated bank, which either pay or negotiates the transferring bank, the confirming bank, the claiming bank, and the reimbursing bank. Of this bank, the issue of consent for the implementation of Islamic requirement pertains only the issuing and negotiating bank. If the issuing bank opens an LC at site, as has been mentioned earlier, the stage of its implementation will not pose any problems, they being in consistency with the Islamic law. If, however, the issuing bank opens a different LC, we may be faced with the legal implication mentioned earlier. The issuing and negotiating banks, who are the main banks in the letter of credit process, can affect the procedure under which the LC operates. Also playing an influential role are the banks and financial institutions which step in to finance defer payment letters of credit at the request of the seller, which is exporter. Next part, I will continue with presentation and negotiation for conventional documentary credit. For complying presentation, when an issue bank determines that a presentation is compliant, it must honor. When a confirming bank determines that a presentation is compliant, it must honor or negotiate and forward the document to the issuing banks. When a nominated bank determines that a presentation is compliant and honors or negotiates, it must forward the document to the confirming bank or issue banks. Negotiation means the purchase by the nominated bank of draft which is drawn on a bank other than the nominated bank, and document under a compliant presentation by advancing or agree to advance funds to the beneficiary on or before the banking day on which reimbursement is due to the nominated banks. When a documentary credit is issued available by negotiation, it means that first, an advance may or may not be made immediately by a nominated bank. Second, draft may or may not be required for presentations. Settlement, if the documentary credit is negotiated earlier, is made on receipt of document by the issue bank site or the maturity date of the draft users. Next is assignment of proceeds for Islamic documentary credit. UCP 500 contains 49 articles distributed across 7 major sections, namely general provision and definition, form and notification of credits, liabilities and responsibilities, document miscellaneous provision, transferable credit, assignment of proceeds. This article regulates the proper procedure and provide for the mechanism of the LC. The practice of UCP 500 is explained by ISBP, which is International Standard Banking Practice, with 200 guidelines will reflect banking practice and has the approval of the ICC Banking Commission. This clarification of the rules and regulation of the UCP standardized and improve the practice of letters of credits. However, in none of the provision has the Islamic position has been considered. Assignment of proceeds for conventional documentary credit. Assignment of proceeds should not be confused with transferable credit. Both terms are definitely different. For a letter of credit to be transferable, it must clearly state that it is transferable. No other terminology is acceptable. However, according to the UCP, the fact that a credit is not stated to be transferable does not affect beneficiary's right to assign any proceeds which he may become entitled to under such credit in accordance with the provision of the applicable law. With an assignment of proceeds, the beneficiary of a letter or credit assign all or part of the proceeds under a credit to a third party they assign. Unlike a transfer credit, the beneficiary maintains sole right to the credit and is solely responsible for complying with its term and condition. For the assignment means only that the paying bank, once it receives notice of the assignment, undertakes to follow the assignment instruction if and when payment is made. An assignment of proceeds does not provide the assigned with any right under the credit. The assigned is dependent upon the beneficiary for compliance. Arrangement is more risky for the assigned than a transfer credit. Next is discrepancy for Islamic documentary credit. Discrepancy in document is one of the problems faced by beneficiary of the letters of credit. It has been said that discrepancies are found in more than 75% of presentation. In view of this and the consequences non-payment of claims against a letter of credit and penalties imposed for discrepant document, we have to look at lessening the harshness with which banks treat discrepancies. Banks earn from discrepancies and are quick to pick them up and penalize the presenter beneficiary. The importer, on the other hand, is ensure for his goods, in most cases with the discrepancies and accept the document with discrepancies, provide that the discrepancy do not hinder him from obtaining possession of the goods. To resolve discrepancy, the minor discrepancy should be passed over without penalties being imposed. We should, in this stage, implement the Makasih of Sharia to address and resolve the problem. This is particularly recommended where there is zero risk to the bank from accepting the discrepancy. This applies where the bank acts strictly as agent for the importer who opens the LC against 100% cash margin. The client is taking all the risk and the bank should not be entitled to impose a penalty where the importer accepts the document with discrepancy. Penalties charges for discrepancy may be acceptable if the bank participates in the risk through committing its funds for the issue of the LC. The bank is entitled to protect its investment and need not tolerate discrepancy in the document presents which can delay payment by the applicant or cause problem in clearing the goods. It is this participation in the risk that alone can entitle the bank to charge for discrepancies. Next is discrepancy for conventional documentary credit. Discrepancy can be defined as an error or defect according to the issuing bank in the presented document compared to documentary credit, the UCP 600 rules or other documents that have been presented under the same letter of credit. According to the LC Market Intelligence Survey conducted by DC Pro in year 2005, the average discrepancy rate on first-time presentation under export letter of credit is 56%. Although the report is quite outdated, the figures are presumably almost identical today. Discrepancy creates problems, especially for the exporters. Once the documents are rejected, the issuing banks can only pay the credit amount if and only if the importers accept the discrepancies. Leaving the payment decision to the importer's hand is a great deal of frustration for the exporter. There are many reasons why exporters present discrepant documents, but the most important ones are: first is lack of knowledge, second, could not understand the letter of credit mechanism, and underestimating the risk factor associated with the letter of credit transactions. Is resolving discrepancy. First is document with discrepancy. The negotiating bank will notify the beneficiary that the document present contain discrepancy. If the beneficiary cannot correct such document within the limit of the letter of credit, the beneficiary will instruct the negotiating bank to either: first is direct the issuing bank to request approval from the applicant customer to pay with the mentioned discrepancy. Second, send the document to the issuing bank on a collection basis. Third, post a guarantee in favor of the paying bank to secure release of funds. Even if the beneficiary can correct the document, payment will definitely be delayed and additional charge will be incurred. When document cannot be correct, the resulting consequences are: first, confirmation if any is voided; second, issue bank is under no obligation to pay.